The transition from a cramped apartment to a spacious house in Alberta felt like a dream come true for my family, with a baby sister on the way. My parents were desperate for space. We found a house just blocks away, listed at a price that seemed almost impossible. It was an older home, slightly weathered, but it had a basement that my father promised to turn into my sanctuary. I spent weeks helping him. We laid down fresh carpeting, scrubbed the grime of decades off the walls, and installed a heavy built-in bookshelf that spanned nearly the entire back wall of my room. I loved that room. It was private, cool, and quiet, or so I thought. The first sign that something was wrong came on my father's birthday. We'd gone out for a celebratory dinner, leaving the house empty for barely 2 hours. When we pulled back into the driveway, the front door was standing wide open, swaying gently in the winter breeze. My heart dropped. My father, grabbing a heavy wrench from his truck, told us to stay in the car while he searched the house. When the police arrived, they found no one. Nothing of value was missing, no electronics, no jewelry. But when I went down to my basement room, my breath hitched. My books, which I had organized alphabetically, were strewn across the floor. They hadn't just fallen, they had been moved. The police dismissed it as a startled burglar, but a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Weeks passed, I began to hear things. At first, I blamed the old pipes, but one night, at 2 a.m., as I lay in bed playing my Nintendo DS, the sound changed. It wasn't a metallic clanking of pipes. It was a dry, raspy laugh coming from directly behind the bookshelf. I froze. My blood felt like ice water. I stared at the wood of the shelf, expecting it to splinter. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying. The climax of my terror happened months later. My sister had been born and was sleeping in a crib in my room. My parents were out, and I was in the kitchen, monitoring her through the baby monitor. Suddenly, the speaker crackled. I heard heavy, rhythmic footsteps. Thump, thump, thump on the basement floor. Then, a voice, a low, guttural whisper hissed into the microphone. I didn't think. I grabbed my father's unloaded rifle and sprinted to the basement, screaming that I was armed. The room was empty, but the baby monitor had been knocked off the table. When the police returned that night, my father noticed something he hadn't seen before, a tiny gap between the bookshelf and the molding. He gripped the edge of the shelf and pulled. The entire unit swung outward like a door. Behind it was a narrow, windowless crawl space. Inside, we found a stained mattress, a collection of my missing spoons, a switchblade, and a half-eaten apple. But the most bone-chilling discovery was a tiny hole drilled through the drywall. It aligned perfectly with my bed. For months, while I slept, while I dressed, while I lived my life, a stranger had been inches away, watching me through that hole. He escaped through the basement window that night, leaving behind nothing but the lingering scent of rot and the memory of that raspy laugh. In 2017, we moved to a split-level house in the suburbs of Montreal. My bedroom was at ground level, featuring a large window that faced the dense woods of the backyard. The blinds were old plastic vertical slats, and several of them were missing or bent, leaving vertical gaps that acted like narrow eyes looking out into the dark. Because of the room's layout, a large mirrored closet stood opposite the window. This meant that if I were lying in bed, I didn't have to look at the window to see what was outside. I could see the reflection of the backyard in the mirror. It started with the shuffling. In the heat of the summer, I kept the window cracked open. One night, while watching videos, I heard the sound of feet treading on dry leaves. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. I froze the video. The sound stopped instantly. I convinced myself it was a raccoon or a stray cat. But then came the breathing, heavy, deliberate, and far too rhythmic to be an animal. I told my father. He did what all fathers do. He grabbed a flashlight, walked the perimeter, and told me I was imagining things. The Ring camera didn't pick up anything, he said, but the Ring camera only faced the front door. The backyard was a blind spot of shadows. For 4 years, this became my life. I stopped looking at the window. I lived in a state of self-imposed denial. But one night in December 2021, a massive windstorm hit Montreal. The power was flickering, and my parents were unusually tense, sitting in the living room with the lights off. Suddenly, a police cruiser pulled into our driveway, its blue and red lights reflecting off the snow. My father rushed me to my room, but minutes later, he called me back out. His face was ghostly pale. He told me that during the storm, he had stepped into the backyard to secure the patio furniture. As he walked past my window, he saw him. A man, dressed in dark clothing, was standing perfectly still, his face pressed against the glass of my window, staring into the gap in the blinds. When my father shouted, the man didn't stumble. He moved with the grace of someone who had practiced this route 1,000 times. He scaled the 6-foot wooden fence in seconds and vanished into the neighbor's yard. We went to the neighbor's house, elderly woman to warn her. Instead of being grateful, she screamed at us to leave, threatening to call the police on us. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That man hadn't just visited once. He had been there for 4 years. Every time I felt a chill, every time I heard a shuffle, he was there. The neighbor's reaction made us wonder, was he her son? Her tenant? Or was she just as terrified as we were? I moved rooms the next day, but to this day, I can never sleep in a room with a window unless the curtains are bolted shut. The final story takes us to the Netherlands, where a simple real estate transaction turned into a descent into the criminal underworld. My partner and I lived in a modest house, and when our neighbors decided to sell their larger, more luxurious home next door, we jumped at the chance. We bought their house and put our old one up for sale. The buyers were a Polish couple. They seemed pleasant enough, though they only spoke English to us. But the moment they moved into our old house, the atmosphere of the street changed. The disturbances began almost immediately. Loud, aggressive music at 3 a.m. The sound of heavy objects being smashed against the shared walls. One day, the neighbor arrived home with his car decimated scrapes and dents on both sides. He claimed he hit a pole and a trailer, but the damage looked like a high-speed chase. A week later, the neighbor called us in a panic. People are outside. They are turning my cameras. Call the police. We looked out and saw 2 men breaking into his house. We called the authorities, but by the time they arrived, the men were gone. Curiously, I saw the husband park his car 3 blocks away and walk to the scene on foot, as if he was hiding his vehicle from the police. The big night happened shortly after. A car came tearing through our front garden, destroying our hedges, and slammed into the neighbor's front door. 2 men began frantically loading the car with high-end electronics, massive TVs, professional audio gear. It looked like a heist in broad daylight. The police arrived in force this time. They caught the men in the act. In a surreal twist, the driver looked the officer in the eye and claimed to be our neighbor. He used the neighbor's name, but there was one problem. He spoke fluent Dutch. Our neighbor had never spoken a word of Dutch in the 9 months he lived there. A violent car chase ensued through our quiet suburb until the criminals were boxed in. As we stood in our living room with an officer, the doorbell rang. Standing there was the real neighbor. He was unrecognizable. His face was a pulp of purple bruises. One eye was swollen shut, and his arm was sliced with defensive stab wounds. He looked like he had been through a meat grinder. He refused to cooperate with the police. Later that night, he pounded on our door. Trembling, he confessed that he had been living a double life. He had cheated on his wife, and he believed she had hired professional hitmen to liquidate him. He begged to hide in our house, fearing for our own lives. We refused, but drove him to the hospital. At 1 a.m., our dog started a low, territorial growl. We checked the camera. The neighbor was back, bloodied and broken, standing on our porch. Suddenly, a car turned the corner. The neighbor panicked and dived behind our cars, crouching in the shadows like a hunted animal. The car stopped. His wife stepped out. She didn't scream. She didn't run to him. She stood in the street and began a haunting, guttural wailless sound of pure grief, or perhaps pure rage. They eventually left together. We never saw them again. We found their dog abandoned inside the house 3 days later. Some secrets are better left buried, and whatever was happening in that house was a darkness we were lucky to survive.